Good afternoon, everybody. I feel like I'm getting you at your post-lunch slump a little bit, so stay awake. I am talking about speech and swallowing. So I have a lot to get through, so I will try to speed up a little bit. But I'm going to be talking about assistive technology as well as low tech, so even paper and pen resources you can use to help with speech and swallowing impairments in ataxia. So disclaimer, I will say that I am salaried, and this is exciting. I have been funded by the National Ataxia Foundation to investigate speech impairments in ataxia. So thank you, NAF. I'm hoping that we can use that to develop effective speech therapy treatments for different types of ataxia. And again, I also lead the Colorado Ataxia Support Group with my two other co-leaders. So if you're in Colorado and you're not a part of it, let me know and I'll get you connected. Okay, so this is what I'm going to go over today. First, just give a general overview of what speech and swallowing difficulties are in ataxia. Talk about current speech therapy options, and then get into the technology. So assistive tools for speech and assistive tools for swallowing. So getting first, what are the speech and swallowing difficulties in ataxia? And as I go through these, think about what you are experiencing. Do you align with what I'm talking about today, or do you differ? Okay, so as we've been learning today, and as you probably are already aware, ataxia affects the cerebellum. So the cerebellum becomes damaged, and that's going to affect coordination of movement. Our cerebellum coordinates movements. So that cerebellar damage will lead to incoordination of movements, and not surprisingly as well, speaking and swallowing both require a very high degree of coordination. So for incoordination of speaking movements, there are a lot of elements that go into having fluent, clear speech. The first is breath control, and that's what I'm studying in my research, so breath control. So breath control, you need a carefully controlled exhale. We talk on the exhale, at least in English. There are a few rare languages that have some phonemes on the inhale, but generally we talk on the exhale. So you have to have a nice, careful, controlled exhale to be able to speak clearly and effortlessly. Then, these are our vocal folds. That's what you're seeing in the top left. Those are our vocal folds when they're open. When you vocalize, they close. They are these muscles that close, and they vibrate. So they vibrate with air going through them. So your vocal folds have to have careful coordination as well. They need to be timed with the exhale. So when you start exhaling, your vocal folds need to close and have good vibration for a nice, clear voice. And that's also how you control your pitch and loudness. Then you have your nasal cavity. We often don't think about our nose when we talk about speech, but there are sounds that we produce through our nasal cavity, and there are also sounds that you produce with only your oral cavity. So you have to close off that nasal cavity. So there's a little flap, this muscle between your nasal and oral cavity, that has to be closed off for certain sounds like a B and open for other sounds like an M. And so if that flap is open or closed at the wrong time, it may be difficult to produce certain sounds. And incoordination from cerebellar damage can affect the coordination of your velar, of that opening. And then our mouth. This is what we all think about with speech. Our oral articulation. You have your tongue, you've got your lips, your jaw, the hard palate on the top of your mouth. All these landmarks and articulatory movements have to be highly coordinated to produce certain sounds. So that's speech. So you can see this list of 4 bullets. Everything that can become incoordinated when you're talking, and that can result in things like breathy voice, a hoarse vocal quality, short phrases, misarticulated sounds, maybe hypernasal speech. So there are a lot of areas where there's something that can go wrong. So this is what happens in ataxic dysarthria. So the term for a speech impairment caused by a neurological disease is called dysarthria. So dysarthria is an impairment in the execution of speech caused by neurological damage. There are specific types of dysarthria that are related to different neurological areas. So for ataxia, it's nicely named ataxic dysarthria. So if you have ataxia and you have a speech impairment, you likely have ataxic dysarthria. And there are key characteristics. If I listen to someone's speech, I can be pretty confident that they have a cerebellar damage because of certain characteristics. So the first is variable prosody. Prosody is pitch, loudness, timing. It's how you sound human and natural and not robotic. That is prosody. And in ataxia, sometimes pitch and loudness are variable. Maybe loudness is too high or too low. Maybe pitch is too high or too low. But you get this variable prosody as well as timing. You may have inconsistent speech errors. So maybe you produce one word and every sound is produced correctly. and maybe you produce another word, and those same sounds are produced incorrectly. So they are variable. So it's not like every time you produce a B, it's wrong. It's that sometimes it's produced correctly, sometimes incorrectly. So that variable production, which also reflects the incoordination of the movements. And then the other one is vocal quality. So right now I'm using what's called a modal vocal quality, a clear vocal quality. I can change my vocal quality to become kind of breathy, right, like Marilyn Monroe. I could talk kind of like hoarse and husky. There are a lot of different ways you can vary your vocal quality. And it's a very personal thing about how you want your voice to sound. But if your vocal quality is impaired by ataxia and you sound in a way that you don't want to sound, maybe you don't want to sound breathy, you want to have a clear voice, that's when it becomes an impairment, especially if it's hard to speak loudly or things like that. But these are the characteristics we would expect in ataxic dysarthria. Okay, swallowing also requires a very high degree of coordination. So again, we don't think about this often, but actually breath control is needed for a healthy, safe swallow. Again, you don't think about this, but as you swallow, you're actually swallowing while exhaling. So we're always breathing. You're always inhaling, exhaling, and as you swallow, you should swallow on the exhale. It helps a few things. It helps your larynx get nice closure, and also it makes it so that in case something goes wrong, you're not inhaling the food while you're swallowing. Neurological damage can impair that pattern of breath control. So you may find that you're actually swallowing on the inhale, and that will increase your risk of aspirating the food into your lungs. Then you have your larynx. Your larynx is what we call the voice box, right? This little section of cartilage in your throat, and that contains your vocal folds, and it also has a couple mechanisms to close off your airway to protect yourself, right? Evolutionarily, we want to protect our airway so that way we can stay alive. So one of the things it does is as you swallow, there's a cartilage called your epiglottis that closes off your airway while you're swallowing so that food or liquid goes over the airway and into the pharynx, into your esophagus. If that epiglottis was not there, food or liquid would go into your airway while you're swallowing. So you have to have that coordination. You start swallowing, your larynx needs to be closed off, and then you need to swallow. So again, another aspect of coordination. Your nasal cavity has to be closed. You don't realize this as well, but that little velum, that flap between your nasal and oral cavity, closes off when you swallow. If it doesn't, you may regurgitate food or liquid into your nose. And then oral cavity. So again, this is what we usually think about with swallowing. You have to have good lip, tongue, jaw coordination and control to be able to chew up the bolus, get it ready for swallow. Okay. So what are some swallow symptoms in ataxia? The first is penetration. Penetration is a term we use when food or liquid enters your airway but is coughed out. So that's a good thing. So if you ever notice, if you have this sensation, that feeling that you need to cough while you're eating or drinking, do it. That means that there's possible food or liquid entering your airway and you're able to cough it out and do a nice forceful cough to make sure that you get that all out. Then there's aspiration. Aspiration is where food or liquid enters your airway but is not coughed out and goes past your vocal folds and into your lungs. It doesn't mean you're going to choke. It doesn't mean that you're going to have an obstruction of your airway. It could mean that some of that food or liquid gets into your lungs and it could cause a bacterial infection. And that would lead to what we call aspiration pneumonia. So that happens more often when someone has a very severe medical condition and they don't feel the food or liquid entering their airway. And that's, as SLPs, what we're trying to prevent. We do not want aspiration to occur. We do not want pneumonia to occur. So if you ever feel that choking sensation, go ahead and cough it out. The other symptom of ataxia is regurgitation of food or liquid nasally. So you may find that you're eating or drinking, and you may find food or liquid coming out of your nose. And the last one is coughing and choking while eating and drinking. Okay, so what can you do about it? What are our current speech therapy options? Okay, the gold standard right now, if somebody were to come up to me like, what is the #1 treatment for ataxia for speech therapy? And the answer is individualized treatment, which is not the most satisfying answer. We don't have like, oh, this treatment program is gonna help everybody. We don't have that yet. It would be nice if we had a list of a couple therapies that do work for a lot of ataxias, and we're not there yet. But hopefully with my funded research, we'll get there. It would be great. But right now it's individualized treatment. So that means you go see the speech therapist. They're going to go through all your specific speech subsystems. How's your breath control? How is your laryngeal control? What about oral control, nasal control? And see what are your specific difficulties. And you can even mention your specific, what you think is most troublesome. Is it your vocal quality? Is it how you articulate certain speech sounds? Is it your breath control? And you can bring that up. So the speech therapist will do an evaluation, determine your specific needs, and put together an individualized treatment program. Some possible goals for speech are improving breath support, improving vocal fold vibration to help control pitch and loudness and prosody. There is a caveat here. There is a speech therapy treatment called Lee-Silverman Voice Treatment, or LSVT, that you may be familiar with. It was originally designed for Parkinson's. And it sounds fancy, but the entire goal of the program is just to speak loudly. So to train you to speak loudly. The reason it works for Parkinson's is because in Parkinson's, your vocal folds become bowed. So when they vibrate, they're not coming together. And if you speak loudly, it brings the vocal folds together to get a clear, louder voice. Vocal fold bowing is not expected in ataxia. So we wouldn't really necessarily expect that improving loudness will have the same effect in ataxia as it does for Parkinson's. That being said, some people have found LSVT to be helpful, and if that's you, that is absolutely wonderful. And if you have not, it's okay to kind of let that go. You could say, okay, that was not the right treatment for me, I'm gonna do other treatments, okay? The other thing an SLP might work on is improving coordination of jaw, lip, and tongue movements. And the last bullet point I wanna say is for ataxia, if you have a purely cerebellar impairment and there's not something else going on, like a cranial nerve impairment or things like that, then it is not recommended to work on strengthening of your oral muscles to improve speech. There's really no evidence that improving strength of facial muscles results in improved speech. So I do want to say that. I'm going to talk in a little bit about swallowing. It's a different story for swallowing, but for speech, strengthening exercises are not recommended. So for you, for your own personal advocacy, when you see a speech therapist, if you're like, I want to improve my speech, and they start giving you strengthening exercises like push your tongue against a tongue depressor, 10 times, we're going to improve the strength of your tongue, that may not be beneficial, and you may just want to bring that up. So just a little caveat there. So swallowing, some potential goals for swallowing would be look at breath control, retrain the breath patterning. Are you swallowing while you're exhaling? Also having a faster and better time swallow to close off your airway. There are adaptive strategies, which I'll talk about in a couple slides. Things like thickening your liquid that will help slow down the liquid. Altering food consistencies, maybe mixed consistencies like having cereal and milk is just too hard to swallow, and you avoid those consistencies altogether. And tucking your chin. Some people find that if you tuck your chin while you swallow, it helps. Some people don't. And my recommendation is always consult with an SLP first before trying it, because I wouldn't want you to aspirate. Okay, and for swallowing, if you have muscle weakness, strengthening the muscles might be beneficial for swallowing. Again, a caveat is that if your disease is purely cerebellar, I wouldn't really expect you to have weak muscles. It's more of an incoordination. But some cerebellar diseases do progress down the spinal cord and will cause some muscle weakness. And in that case, strengthening your muscles might be beneficial for swallowing. And I can talk to you after this if you want to know your specific circumstances. Okay, more standardized treatment programs. There is a really exciting new program. I'm sure some of you have worked with Dr. Adam Vogel in Australia. He's a big speech researcher, and he has recruited participants in the United States. He has a treatment called the Melbourne Ataxia Speech Treatments. And this is really promising. The one thing is it's not yet available for the public. So I emailed him about a month ago to ask, can I try this out with my support group members? And he said, it's not yet available. We're still doing research studies. So keep an eye out. This is an exciting program. What I like about it is it's specific for ataxia in a few ways. One, it's a home-based program. So you do it on your computer at home. I'm sure you already have millions of appointments you're going through every week. How nice would it be to just be at home to do your speech therapy, right? So that's exciting. And it's not too complex. You're practicing pitch and loudness and articulatory movements with a computer program at home. So that's coming out hopefully soon, and that's an exciting new treatment. Then you have the Lee Silverman voice treatment, which we've talked about. Again, it's originally designed for Parkinson's. It's very intensive, which is why I'm cautious about recommending it. You have to go 4 days a week for multiple hours for 4 weeks with home exercise. So you have to devote like a solid month to this treatment and this treatment alone because it's very intensive. And the jury's out on whether it's actually effective for ataxia. And the other one is a swallowing treatment. It's called the respiratory swallow treatment. And it's a new swallowing treatment to retrain your breath patterning to improve your swallow. It has not been studied in ataxia yet. I would love to study it in my lab, but I think it is very promising. Okay, but let's get into assistive tools because we don't have a ton of time. So the first one is assistive tools to mitigate speech impairments. I do want to mention this great article. So there's a QR code if you want to pull up the article. It has all this information. Optimizing communication in ataxia, a multifaceted approach to alternative and augmentative communication. You know, the first author is Dr. Adam Vogel from Australia. The second author is also a big ataxia researcher out of Indiana University, Dr. Caroline Spencer. So keep an eye on those two people. They do really good work, and this is a great review paper. But I will summarize it in a few slides. Okay. So AAC, you may hear a speech therapist say, we should look into an AAC device. What is AAC? And it's the name of our conference. So when I hear AAC, I think of AAC device. And now I have to think of annual Ataxia conference as well, all these acronyms. AAC stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication Devices. That sounds really fancy, but all it is any sort of tool, whether it's high-tech, low-tech, paper and pen, any tool that will help you communicate. There are challenges with these devices for ataxia. One of them is upper limb ataxia. So if you have upper limb ataxia and you have a hard time coordinating your movements, fingers, hands, arm movements, it may be hard to manipulate a device. So if you have a tablet device that has symbols, that may be hard to manipulate quickly. Another one is visual disturbances. So it may be difficult if you have nystagmus, double vision, things like that, to actually see the symbols if they're small on a screen. Some AAC devices have eye tracking. If you picture like Stephen Hawking's or someone with ALS who has more of a severe condition, they're in a wheelchair, you can actually get a device that looks at your eye movements, and the eye movements will allow you to choose the symbols. It's not as common in ataxia, but it is available. So the difficulty with using a device like that for ataxia would be the nystagmus might make it hard to track your eye movements. So that's a challenge. And then impaired speech. So if you wanted to use something that had like a speech-to-text function where you say something and it types it out, that may be hard in ataxia. So because of these challenges, we have to be strategic in identifying devices that work for your specific strengths and weaknesses. And so again, it's an individualized approach. We can't just say this device is available for everyone with ataxia. It's a very individualized approach. Okay. So for most people with ataxia, spoken language, so speech, is going to be their primary form of communication. So speech and ataxia, although impaired, is still often highly understandable for many people, regardless of disease progression. I mean, I keep learning as I have participants. I see people who've had SCA for 30, 40, 50 years, and they still only have a mild or mild to moderate speech impairment. I meet somebody else who has only had SCA, for example, for 3 or 4 years, and they have a more severe impairment. So there's definitely not a consistent progression among everybody for what speech will look like. So again, for most people, spoken language will be their primary form of communication. But some people like to have a device to assist them to communicate, and others will wholly rely on the device to communicate. So again, your specific strengths and challenges. So non-tech tools are great. Gestures, it seems obvious, but it's something to think about. You can use gestures to help you communicate. One is sign language. It sounds great, but the caveat is the person you're talking to, are they fluent in sign language? So it is a language, and it is a lot to learn, and the person you're communicating with also has to sign. So that's a bit of a challenge. But you can use gestures. So gestures, and think of symbolic gestures that can aid your speech to help you be more understandable. So for example, if you're pointing to what you're talking about, like I'm talking about this presentation, so pointing can be very effective. Imitating the shape of something, you know, I have a bottle or I have a ball, you know, imitating the shape with your hands, you know, try to be very Italian in how you're talking, and that can help aid your communication. Facial expressions, so be a little bit exaggerative with your facial expressions, what you're talking about. You can use a thumbs up. One cue is trying to see, did the person understand what you're saying? You could take a pause, have a thumbs up, raise your eyebrows just to see, like, did you understand what I was saying? And then another challenge whenever anybody has a communication impairment is getting your turn in a conversation. And you may have to be a little bit more obvious about trying to get that turn. And it may be something where you hold your hand up in the middle of a conversation, like, I'm going to talk, and you hold the floor. That's what we call it, holding the floor, and make sure you get your turn. So using your gestures to aid your communication. Paper and pen. So it's always helpful to have a paper and pen. You can write out what you're saying. You can also use an alphabet board. So there are alphabet boards like this. They're freely available online. You can make one yourself as well. You can do an alphabetical, or you can do QWERTY. I feel like I'm more used to QWERTY. That's how your keyboard would look. And there is evidence that speech is more intelligible if you put your finger on the letter of the word you're saying starts with. So if I'm going to say, my name is Allison, I first put my finger on M for my, N for name, I for is, A for Allison. And if you just do that simple movement of putting your finger on each letter that the word starts with, it can vastly improve your intelligibility. So it's a tool to have. You could have it in your pocket, pull it out. If someone's not understanding you, just putting your finger on each letter can improve your intelligibility. Okay, and then there are more specialized apps. I'm going to go through each of these. The first one is called a speech generating device, SGD, a speech generating device. So what it is, it's a device that produces speech based off of what you type or press. There are options. There are text to speak, so you type out what you want to say. There are pre-programmed messages where you either click on the whole phrase or it's a symbol. And then there are predictive text options, which is great with AI nowadays. So you don't have to type out everything. It's going to start predicting what you're trying to say. There are apps for your phone or tablet. They are usually self-paid or free. Or if you want a dedicated device, and I've seen a couple at this conference, if you want a dedicated device, you can go through your insurance, Medicare, or Medicaid and get that device. And I'll talk about that in a second. How are you going to use this device? You can use the device wholly, like completely depend on it, or you can use it to supplement your speech. So let's say you use your spoken language as your main way of communicating, and then you come into a situation where there's miscommunication, maybe over the phone or in a doctor's office. You could pull the device out to help you in that situation. So just because you have a device doesn't mean you have to abandon your voice. Oftentimes people don't. They use their voice mostly, and they use the device as a secondary way of communicating. Also, voices have gotten more sophisticated. You think of like the robotic form, maybe 10, 15 years ago. Voices on these apps are a lot more sophisticated and natural sounding. And you can also add your voice to the device, which I'll talk about. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple quick options, and I would take some screenshots of these if you want to use these. On your iPhone, there are free options available already. The recommended option I would recommend is called Live Speech, and it's a text-to-speech function where you type out and it says what you're saying. So if you go to your iPhone, you go to Settings, Accessibility, and then click Live Speech. I have that circled. And then if you triple tap the right-hand power button, which I know may be hard with Ataxia, but triple tap the right-hand power button, this little box will pop up, and you can type out what you want to say, and it will say what you're typing out, and you can choose what voice you want. Okay, there are a couple other options as well under the accessibility section of the iPhone. There's one called Speak Selection, and if you enable it, then if you go to your Notes app, type out what you want to say, and then you kind of highlight it, there'll be these options that pop up, and one of them says Speak. So you can press Speak, and it will say what you typed out. And then there's Speak Screen as well. There's a lot of options on the iPhone. So again, under Accessibility, Spoken Content, click Speak Screen. Then you get this black box that's kind of available. And with two fingers, if you scroll down from the top, this little black box pops up. And again, you can speak whatever is on your screen. So if you type something out, you can click that, and it will speak what you're saying. And then the last one for the iPhone is Speech Controller. So under Accessibility, if you highlight both Speak Selection and Speak Screen, and then you can choose what long press and double tap mean. Then you see that little black arrow, that box with the black arrow, that will always be up, and you can always click that, and it will speak whatever's on your screen. So whether you type it out or if you want to just speak what's on your screen. So I do want to say this, that there are some great free options on your iPhone, and probably Android as well. I'd have to look into it for this text-to-speak option. On this iPhone as well, you can choose what voice you want, and these voices are really great, and they have different languages as well. Okay, but there are other devices. There are a ton of apps. People often ask me, what app do you recommend? There are so many AAC apps available, and these will always be changing. Here are some that I recommend and other SLPs recommend. The first one is called Weave Chat AAC. It is free. You use symbols, or you can type in what you want to say. It's predictive, so it will start to predict what you're saying. It has a limited set of voices to choose from. You can build a set of functional phrases, and it's good for people who do not want to type. I'm going to start going through these a little bit quickly because I'm running out of time. There's Speech Assistant, which is $24. Again, it has symbols or text. It's predictive. There are voices to choose from. This one's cool because you can use it with a phone call. So let's say you're on the phone, they don't understand you well. You can pull this up, and you can use the voice on this phone as you type for the phone call. Okay. Then there's an app called Spoken. This one's pretty cool because it does use AI to start learning your patterns, your texting, your typing, your patterns, so that way it gets a lot easier for you. You don't have to type out everything that you're saying. Okay, I like this one a lot. I'm excited about this one. But there are so many AAC apps, and it might be a matter of you downloading a few and playing with them and seeing what works best for you. My advice, let's say you have an iPhone, have the text-to-speech enabled under the accessibility settings, and then also have an app you like. So have two options. Have a couple tools in your belt. Okay, but let's say you want a dedicated device. A dedicated device that's a lot more intensive and has a little bit more research behind it. Then you can get a device funded by your insurance, Medicare, or Medicaid. You do need an evaluation by a speech-language pathologist. If you go to really any outpatient rehabilitation clinic at a hospital, they should have a speech-language pathologist that is specifically specialized in AAC devices. And they will choose the device that's best for you and then personalize it to your preferences. They can build a list of functional phrases that you use in everyday life. They can organize the displays. They can choose the font and symbol size that work well for you. And they can choose the right voice and help you with voice banking, which I'm going to get through in a little bit. Usually, what insurance or Medicare or Medicaid give you is a device that can only be used for the AAC system. So they're going to give you an iPad tablet or a Microsoft Surface tablet, and you can't use that tablet for anything else but this device. You can't install any other apps. And it's very expensive. Sometimes it runs $15,000 to $20,000, and it may be fully covered or partially covered by insurance. But it is a good thing to look into. Okay. It's a good option if you think you have a form of ataxia that's quickly progressive. For example, when I work with someone with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, we would start working on this right away, because with that disease, within 5 years, people are typically dysphonic. They've typically lost their voice completely, and they will be 100% reliant on this device. So if you were to have a condition that is that quickly progressive, we would get on it right away. Many forms of ataxia are not that quickly progressive, and many of them often stay chronic or have similar symptoms for many years. But it's something to think about depending on your specific circumstances. And the SLP can monitor your use of the AAC device and make adjustments as needed. If you have a very serious condition where you have a hard time texting, choosing symbols, or talking, there are other things, like I said, like eye tracking. There would be a little monitor that would track your eyes, and you can just look at the symbols to choose what symbol you want. And then there's also head movement tracking. So it can track your head movements. And as you move your head, you can choose what symbols you want. There is some pretty cool technology depending on the severity of your condition. There are lower tech tools. When I used to work in special education, I did tools like this when I worked with children with Down syndrome or autism. These are great, and you may have seen them too in popular videos where people are using these tools to talk to their dogs, for example. These buttons, you can get them in many forms, but you can actually pre-record a word or a phrase in these buttons, and then you press the button and it says the phrase. So for example, when I worked in a special education classroom, I would have a button next to the bathroom, and the child would go up and press it, and it would say, I want to go to the bathroom. And okay, you want to go to the bathroom. And I let them in the bathroom. So it's great for children. It's great for maybe having a device available in certain settings that somebody needs to say something, like going to the bathroom, leaving the house, things like that. The Go Talk is really cool because that's the device on the right. You can actually have multiple displays that you can take in and out and have multiple recordings. So it's almost like an iPad, but a little bit less high tech, which is also great for kids who, if you give them an iPad, they start playing with it, and they're not going to play with this device, right? Okay. Voice banking. I get this question a lot. How do I bank my voice? What does it mean? So earlier in your ataxia diagnosis, you can start banking your voice by using a company to record it. Then later on, let's say you want to use a speech-generating device, you can add your voice to that device later on. How do you do this? I recommend working with an SLP to figure out what company you want to use and to start banking your voice. It requires about 3 to 7 hours total. So if you think you do an hour a day for a week, maybe do a couple hours for a few days, you'll record hundreds to thousands of phrases. So it's pretty tiring. So give yourself that time to kind of spread that out. Insurance may help out with costs. Out of pocket, it averages about $1,500. So not extremely expensive, but I also wouldn't say it's cheap. These are the recommended companies: Acapella Group, Modal Talker, Vocal ID, Speak Unique, and My Message Banking. So these are the main companies right now. There may be more in the future. But really, you start banking your voice. You can kind of forget about it for a few years if you don't want to use it. And then when you have a device later on, your speech therapist or this company can help you add your voice to the device. So that way, when you type something out, it's your voice that you're hearing and not some robotic voice. Okay, summaries and recommendations, and I'm going to fly through the swallowing stuff. So I always recommend having a few tools up your tool belt. Have an alphabet board, a pen and paper, have the live speech or another text-to-speech option enabled on your phone, and have a low-cost app on your phone. Having different options for when miscommunication occurs. Then connect with an AAC specialist like an SLP at an outpatient rehabilitation clinic if you want to look into a more dedicated device. Okay, let me get through swallowing very quickly. I want to say my first recommendation is to do a swallow evaluation because it is a very personalized aspect to see what you're specifically struggling with swallowing. One person's strategies may not work for someone else. So one person may say, when I use a straw, it helps with swallowing. Another person might say, straws make me choke. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to see what works for you. What is an evaluation, what to expect? It's an X-ray. So there is the risk of radiation. You don't want to get a swallow evaluation all the time, maybe like once every 5 years or so. You have to be careful with X-ray exposure. But it's X-ray imaging of your swallow. We put a substance called barium in liquid or on a cracker, and we can see that barium on the X-ray. And we're trying to see, is the food or liquid going back where it should into your pharynx, or is any of it sneaking down into your airway? And we can see that. And then we can also see what consistencies you swallow best. Okay, there are some no-tech swallow strategies you can implement right away. One is the chin tuck. So you chuck your chin while swallowing. Again, some people this helps, some people it doesn't help. You do need to get evaluated to see if this works for you. Swallowing twice per bite. So if you swallow twice per bite, every time you take a bite, it will help the swallow be stronger and better timed, and also help get rid of some of the residue that's left behind. Sitting upright and swallowing strongly. So in my Birds of a Feather this morning, people were asking swallow strategies. Sometimes it's just thinking more about your swallow because it's something we do so subconsciously. And to better coordinate your swallow, sometimes it just requires thinking about it all the time, which can be exhausting, right? I'm sure with ataxia, you're thinking, well, I'm already thinking all the time about my gait. I'm already thinking about my speech. Now I have to think about my swallow too. Depending on where you are and what you're eating, it might be something where every time you swallow, you have to think swallow strongly, and that can help better coordinate that swallow. And then taking a sip of water. Water can help a lot with getting the food or liquid down, making sure it's not caught in your pharynx, and also catching any residue. Okay, but here are some quick swallow food and devices and tools. The first one are liquid thickeners, and I do not recommend you go to Amazon right now and buy these on your own. You really need to work with a specialist to figure out what level of thickening is best for you. So liquid thickeners, so thicker liquids are slower. That is the concept. If you drink a milkshake, it's slower than drinking water, and if it's slower, it's easier to coordinate and easier to time your swallow. So for example, a thin liquid would be considered water, coffee, tea. Those are thick liquids, they are fast. Then we have other levels of thick. We call them nectar thick, honey thick, and pudding thick. And based off of what level of thickening you want, you can get a specific thickener powder that will make it to that consistency. So nectar thick is like maple syrup or tomato juice. Honey thick is like a thickness of honey. And pudding thick is like the thickness of pudding. Some people really cannot handle the texture, the feel of swallowing something that's thick, especially like drinking water and it's thick. Some people cannot handle that, and it's okay. Think about your quality of life. You know, what are your priorities? You know, if this helps with your swallow so much that you don't mind the thickening, that's great. It's a great tool. If you're like, it helps my swallow, but I really can't stand the texture, then that's also fine to abandon it. So it's up to you what works for your lifestyle, but work with an SLP to figure out which level of thickening is best for you. Okay, then we have some other tools that are great that I found on various sites. So there are tools like this, the Eat Well Assistive Tableware Set, where the bowls have slanted bottoms and curved spoons. It helps cups not tip over, and it reduces spilling situations. The Ellie spoon, it has counterweight and rotation to keep the spoon level regardless of movement. This is great if you have significant arm or hand tremor. And it has no electrical components, which is really nice. It is pricey, though. Okay, then you have weighted utensils. These are less expensive, so they're nice to try, but do keep in mind they work well for some people. They work very not well for other people. So it is a caveat. So some people might love it. Some people, the weight just helps them coordinate better. Other people, the weight may even worsen their tremor. So you don't really know if it's going to work for you until you try it. The nice thing is they are not too pricey. Liftware spoon. So this does have electrical components. It stabilizes movement for tremors. So if you have significant hand tremor, it will stabilize the movement as you eat the food. And then a meal lifter. I love this because it's so simple. So it's a lifter device, so that way the plate is closer to you. So you know, the plate's down here normally, it lifts the plate up, and now you have that shorter of a distance to reach. And then this is safety. So anyone who cooks, this is a great idea. And honestly, I cut myself a lot while cooking too. I'm pretty clumsy. So this is really good for anybody. Cut-resistant safety gloves. So think about safety in the kitchen and what you can do to reduce any instances. Okay, so these are just some options, mostly for you to be aware that there are options that can help with eating and swallowing. So if eating is easier, if drinking is easier, it's probably going to make swallowing easier as well. It's one less thing to think about. Okay, I get this question a lot too, strategies for choking on saliva. People often choke on saliva during the day or overnight. How do you improve that? We don't have a gold standard treatment where I can say, do this and it'll work for everyone, it'll completely fix your problem, but there are strategies. And the first is acid reflux. So acid reflux can make choking on saliva worse. So you can talk with your doctor about choosing a diet that reduces stomach acid, things like avoiding things like onions or soda, things that will increase stomach acid. Avoid eating after 7 p.m., maybe taking medication that reduces stomach acid. But just reducing acid reflux can reduce your instances of choking on saliva. You can wear an oral mouth guard at night that will reduce choking episodes at night, so you're not waking up to those choking episodes. You can take a prescription that reduces saliva production. You have to be careful not to get dry mouth. You can also consciously remind yourself to swallow more often. So the more you swallow that saliva, the less saliva you're going to have to choke on. And then allergies. Allergies can increase saliva production, so managing your allergies. So these are the recommendations we have for now. They're not great. It's a lot about lifestyle management and seeing what works for you. But I do hope that these are helpful. Okay, that is everything I went through. I hope I'm good on time. And these are my summary recommendations really quick. Overall, there's limited evidence for what tools are effective in ataxia for speaking and swallowing. My advice is to work with an expert, work with the SLP to find strategies and tools that are beneficial for you. Again, everybody here has their own unique strengths and weaknesses. There are a variety of no-tech, low-tech, and high-tech options that you can use to improve speech and swallowing at different stages of the disease progression. Insurance may cover all or part of these devices, and there are some low-cost options as well. And talk to your healthcare team about whether you want to pursue voice banking or not. This is me. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about my study. Email me anytime with questions about speech or swallowing for ataxia. I'm very happy to help. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'll wait to see what people say. But thank you so much. Appreciate it.